The rain always seemed heavier in Britain during the 1980s. It fell across factory towns and suburban driveways, across company car parks filled with metallic paint and fading chrome. And somewhere beneath that gray British sky sat the cars ordinary families trusted with everything. School runs, summer holidays, late-night breakdowns, first jobs, last chances. Some were dependable companions. Others quietly became symbols of disappointment. But together, they captured an entire decade of British life in motion. This was an era when owning the right car still meant something. A new saloon parked outside a semi-detached house could signal ambition, stability, progress, even pride. Yet behind the polished brochures and showroom smiles, many of these cars carried stories far more human than the advertisements ever admitted. And for countless fathers across Britain, these were the cars they drove through the final years of old industrial Britain, before everything changed.
At number 10 was the Austin Montego. When it arrived in 1984, the Montego was supposed to rescue British Leyland's battered reputation. It looked modern enough for the time, with sharp lines, a spacious cabin, and digital dashboards on higher trims that felt almost futuristic to middle-class buyers staring through dealership windows. For families upgrading from aging Cortinas or Marinas, the Montego represented hope. A bigger house, a better job, a chance to appear successful without buying foreign. The estate version became especially common across Britain's suburbs. Dogs in the boot, suitcases strapped down for Cornwall holidays, children asleep against steamed-up windows during motorway traffic. But the reality often arrived quickly. Build quality was inconsistent. Electrical faults became infamous. Trim rattled loose. Rust crept into wheel arches before finance payments had even ended. And while the 2.0-liter engine sounded respectable on paper, refinement rarely matched European rivals. Still, many owners defended them stubbornly, because in 1980s Britain, buying British still carried emotional weight. The next car would test that loyalty even further. At number 9 was the Morris Ital. Even by 1980, the Ital already felt outdated. Beneath its mildly modernized styling hid engineering rooted deeply in the previous decade. Yet thousands of British families bought one anyway. Partly because they were affordable, partly because they were familiar. The Ital belonged to a Britain where practicality mattered more than excitement. Sales reps drove them through endless rain-soaked motorways. Elderly couples trusted them for weekly shopping trips. Fathers spent Sunday mornings polishing them proudly on quiet council estates. Inside, there was fake wood trim, soft suspension, and a strange sense of old-fashioned comfort. It felt less like stepping into the future and more like refusing to leave the past behind. Unfortunately, the car itself struggled to justify even modest expectations. Steering felt vague, reliability could be unpredictable, and corrosion became a constant enemy. Owners often discovered bubbling rust spreading silently beneath paintwork long before the car reached old age. Yet perhaps that was the tragedy of the Ital. It wasn't hated because it was terrible. It was forgotten because Britain was changing faster than the car ever could. And then came a machine that promised sophistication, but delivered frustration.
At number 8 sat the Rover SD3, better known as the Rover 200. Launched in 1984, it was meant to modernize Rover completely. With Honda engineering influence and cleaner styling, it finally gave Britain's struggling car industry a glimpse of credibility again. For young professionals climbing cautiously through Thatcher-era Britain, the Rover badge still carried status. Owning one suggested you had escaped the uncertainty of the 1970s. It hinted at promotions, mortgage approvals, and neatly trimmed front lawns. The cabin felt refined compared to older British rivals. Velour seats, clean dashboards, and smoother engines created genuine optimism. But ownership could still become complicated. Electrical gremlins haunted some cars. Interior plastics aged poorly. And despite Honda's influence, lingering British Leyland manufacturing problems still damaged confidence. Yet for many fathers, the Rover 200 became the car they drove to new office jobs, listening to Dire Straits through crackling speakers, while Britain reinvented itself around them. The next car carried far more ambition and far greater disappointment.
At number 7 was the Triumph Acclaim. Today, it feels strangely forgotten, but in 1981, the Acclaim represented survival. It was effectively a Honda Ballade underneath, built in Britain during one of the darkest periods for the domestic industry. After years of strikes, collapsing quality, and public embarrassment, the Acclaim finally gave buyers something unfamiliar from a British badge: reliability. For ordinary families exhausted by constant repair bills, this mattered enormously. The Acclaim started on cold mornings. It rarely overheated in traffic. Doors shut properly. Things worked. That sounds simple now. Back then, it felt revolutionary. And yet, there was sadness hidden beneath its success. Because the Acclaim also quietly admitted something painful. Britain could no longer compete alone. Japanese engineering had become the lifeline. Some buyers loved the dependability. Others felt betrayed by how un-British it seemed. Still, compared to what arrived next, the Acclaim looked positively dignified. At number 6 was the Ford Sierra. Technically not British by ownership more completely. When Ford unveiled the Sierra in 1982, its aerodynamic jelly mold styling shocked conservative buyers. Compared to square Cortinas, it looked almost alien. At first, many fathers hated it. Company car drivers complained the shape looked soft. Taxi drivers distrusted its modern curves. Yet slowly, Britain adapted. And then the Sierra became everywhere. Police cars, motorway cruisers, repmobiles parked outside pubs and office blocks. The XR4i and later Cosworth versions transformed it into something genuinely aspirational. For many working-class men, the Sierra represented a rival, especially in metallic blue under sodium streetlights. But ownership varied wildly depending on the model. Cheap interiors wore badly. Rust attacked aggressively in harsher climates. Base engines struggled under heavy loads. Still, the Sierra earned something priceless: affection. And the next car would spend years desperately trying to earn the same respect.
At number 5 came the Austin Maestro. British Leyland launched it in 1983 with enormous expectations. This was supposed to be the people's car of modern Britain. It had hatchback practicality, fuel-efficient engines, and futuristic electronic voice warnings that astonished buyers at dealerships. The door is open. In theory, it sounded advanced. In reality, many owners quickly grew tired of hearing robotic warnings while sitting stranded beside rainy roads. Yet millions genuinely wanted the Maestro to succeed. Because behind every purchase was usually an ordinary family trying to make sensible decisions during difficult economic times. Rising unemployment, industrial decline, and uncertainty made affordable transport emotionally important. The Maestro promised reliability and value. Instead, many owners found weak build quality, uneven handling, and electrical issues that slowly destroyed confidence. And still, thousands remember them fondly. Because nostalgia rarely remembers cars exactly as they were. It remembers who we were when we drove them. But the next vehicle became something very different. A symbol of ambition itself.
At number 4 was the Jaguar XJ40. When Jaguar introduced it in 1986, Britain desperately needed a luxury car that could compete globally again. The XJ40 looked elegant, modern, and undeniably expensive. For businessmen arriving outside restaurants or country hotels, it projected success beautifully. The cabin smelled of leather and walnut veneer. Digital dashboards glowed softly at night.
The long bonnet stretched endlessly ahead like something from another social class entirely. For many men who grew up in post-war austerity, owning a Jaguar felt almost emotional, proof they had made it. Unfortunately, maintaining one often became equally emotional. Electrical problems haunted early cars. Suspension repairs became expensive. Some owners watched warning lights illuminate like Christmas decorations across the dashboard. Yet, despite the flaws, the XJ40 carried enormous presence. Because sometimes people forgive unreliability if a car makes them feel important enough. The next car, however, struggled to make owners feel anything at all.
At number 3 sat the Vauxhall Cavalier Mark II. Efficient, reliable, respectable, and somehow deeply unforgettable. Throughout the 1980s, Cavaliers filled Britain's roads quietly and completely. Sales representatives lived inside them. Families crossed the country in them. Driving instructors trusted them endlessly. The Cavalier reflected a changing Britain, becoming more practical, more corporate, and less sentimental. Unlike many rivals, it usually started reliably every morning. Rust protection improved, fuel economy made sense during uncertain financial times. And perhaps that reliability explains why so few people speak emotionally about them now. Because dependable cars rarely create dramatic stories. They simply become part of life itself. Still, the car at number 2 would create memories impossible to forget.
At number 2 was the Rover SD1. Even today, the SD1 still looks magnificent. Launched originally in the late 1970s, but deeply embedded into 1980s Britain, it combined aggressive styling with genuine presence. The shape resembled an Italian exotic more than a British executive saloon. Police forces loved them. Executives admired them. Enthusiasts dreamed about the V8. For a brief moment, it seemed Britain had built something world-class. Then reality intervened. Poor assembly quality damaged the car relentlessly. Water leaks, electrical faults, interior deterioration. Owners encountered problems that felt almost insulting given the price. And yet, people kept loving them. Because the SD1 possessed charisma modern cars often lack entirely. It felt alive. Imperfect, but alive. Which brings us to number 1. The car your dad probably remembers more clearly than any other.
At number 1 was the Austin Metro. Small, affordable, and absolutely everywhere. By the mid-1980s, the Metro had become woven into everyday British life completely. Teenagers learned to drive in them. Pensioners parked them outside corner shops. Young couples bought them, hoping to stretch limited wages as far as possible. The Metro wasn't glamorous. It didn't pretend to be. But it represented something deeply human. Ordinary survival. Built during years when Britain faced enormous social and economic change, the Metro became transport for millions, simply trying to keep moving forward. Its tiny dimensions suited crowded streets. Fuel economy mattered desperately. Insurance stayed manageable. And despite all the jokes, many owners loved them genuinely. Children remember sticky rear seats and cassette tapes. Fathers remember fixing them on cold driveways beneath flickering porch lights. Families remember long summer journeys with barely enough luggage space for everyone. Of course, the Metro had flaws. Fragile rust protection, aging engineering, limited performance. But none of that truly explains why people still talk about them today. They remember them because these cars carried ordinary British lives through extraordinary years. And perhaps that is the real story of 1980s British motoring. Not perfection, not prestige. Memory. These cars witnessed Britain changing street by street, family by family. They carried workers through collapsing industries and drove children toward futures their parents could barely imagine. Some failed spectacularly, others quietly endured.
But together, they became rolling snapshots of an entire nation searching for identity during uncertain times. And somewhere tonight, beneath garage lights or hidden under old photographs, these cars still survive in memory. Not as machines, but as chapters of people's lives. So tell me,